gold trails and ghost towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barley.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and we're here today to take you back to the mighty Fraser River, biggest river, I guess, in the province of British Columbia, not counting the Peace, which is heading off somewhere else. And the Columbia. But it is the river that led to the heartland of the nation.
Yep, it's the most historic river of the province. Virtually everyone knows about the Fraser. So we'll take a look at some areas in the Fraser we haven't looked at before. We've touched on Hope. We'll touch on it only briefly. We've touched on Yale, did a couple of programs on Yale, so we'll bypass that essentially, and we'll come back to it at the end of the program. And then we'll go to Boston Bar and North Bend, which we really haven't touched.
I can't believe we haven't done Boston Bar because it was the first, well, I mean, in my family's travels through British Columbia when I was a kid, going through the Fraser Canyon and being at Boston Bar was pivotal to talking about the caribou.
Oh, of course. Boston Bar was an old stopping place right from the late 1850s right to today.
Okay, a return to the Fraser River when we come back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns after this break. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and we're talking about the Fraser River and some of the towns on the Fraser River. And I guess just to locate ourselves, Hope, the town now, was originally called Fort Hope.
Fort Hope, Hudson Bay Post. Very interesting. That's an early sketch of Fort Hope as it looked then. A little stern wheeler in the river, and not big like Yale. Yale, of course, is much bigger than Hope, and kind of like I like the old name. I like Fort Hope.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting sketch in the first place because who did it and why?
Might have been O'Brien. I'm not sure. It wasn't in the archives with the work I looked at, but it looks like an O'Brien to me.
And why would he have done it?
He was a correspondent who was wandering through it, an artist, and sketched on the river all the way up.
And so that illustration would probably have accompanied some kind of a story about the discovery of gold on the Fraser.
Certainly.
And that would, because this was just around the establishment of photography, but before the first camera got there.
Yeah, although there's some very early shots on the Fraser, 1862, 63, Mike.
And the Fraser is the river in question here.
Oh, yeah.
Now this shot here just says it all to me. I mean, contemplate people coming down there on a flimsy raft and trying to make their way up in this awful terrain.
Yeah, it's a very, very dangerous river. It's precipitous. The walls are precipitous. The river itself is dangerous. It's unpredictable. You can't ask for much more danger than that.
And this one is above the canyon. What are all those racks around the edges?
Those are drying racks for salmon. That's an Indian fishery, very close to Hell's Gate, Mike. And that's where they dried the fish.
So this is the same country that the prospector had to get through in order to get to the bars on the Fraser to do some panning.
That's right, and they worked that river very assiduously right from the 1850s right till the Chinese in the late 1890s.
This is a shot of a couple of Chinese miners. Is that a rocker box? That would be
what
that is?
That's a rocker, yep.
And they've got these the metal scoops that
yes.
So they're working that little corner of the river. How long would they spend there?
Well, it depends how long the low water remained of that. They took low water. You usually work the river in low water in the spring or in the fall.
Yep.
So this is what the Chinese did, and did very, very well. They gleaned the river and got their tithe every year.
We've got a lot of artifacts to do with the Chinese in here. And now we've shown this before, but this is one of the gold scales that they would have used. This would have been their own measure of how much they had, and really pretty accurate.
And they could measure that very, very quickly, Mike, and that would stay in the sash as they were mining. And they would, at the end of each day, they knew precisely how much they had earned. Then they would take that to the Chinese banker in Yale, and he would put it away for them, and there was a good arrangement for them. They did very, very well.
The little marks on the back here, they would just move the balance point along there and be darn close to what brass scales that would be used by other people would show.
Yes, very, very, probably just as accurate.
And look at that, the fact that it comes in its own little bamboo container and ties together. Do you have any of the provenance of an item like this, or is it just too hard to follow?
Actually, I have. That came out of Yale. It came out of the Chinese section in Yale. And I have the name of some of the Chinese miners, not all of them, Mike.
Well, that is a treasure because it's Obviously, it's wood. It could deteriorate. It could have been destroyed.
Bamboo's
broken,
tough to deteriorate, though.
but it's intact.
Oh, yeah,
and
it
it
is.
works.
Yeah.
All of these little brass coins here. Now, brass slugs. What are these?
Well, those are actually, some of those are quite rare. Some of the Chinese in Vancouver's Chinatown said, Bill, some of those are extremely rare. And of course, there are collectors in Hong Kong and China proper that do collect Chinese coins. So I'll have to go over a Chinese book or catalog on the coins and see exactly how rare they are. They were quite impressed.
Grab that stick over there, because nobody would actually handle these coins except the person who finally won. The guy who was doing the gambling,
or whatever it was,
he would use this to push the money around on the table.
That's the house stick. Yeah, he would not use his fingers. They didn't trust him.
And isn't that something? Yeah. And he was proud to have this one. And when you take a look at one of these house sticks, you can see that the patina is worn right off there.
Yeah.
The thousands of flicks of the wrist.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that a neat piece of work?
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece.
Again, a fragile piece of work, because it could have been broken. Some kid could have thought, that looks like an arrow to me, and fired it into the river.
Aren't easy to find at all.
I won't pick these up because they're just so tiny, and we'll just take a look at them here. These are vials that contain Oriental medicine, and they're all still sealed.
Yeah, after 100 years, they're still sealed.
Look at this. Now, what might be in there, Bill?
Well, I purchased those from August Sinclair Milliken when he was selling his collection about 20-odd years ago. And he said they're quite important, Bill, because you get a lot of empty medicine bottles, and some people say they're opium bottles. That's nonsense. They aren't. Opium came in a brass tin. And but they have the directions and how much you'd take and how much you would not take, and so it's quite interesting. I find it a real picture in the past. You reach right back into a century, and
each one sealed with wax on the top there.
Yep.
Just amazing. This is also, anytime you find something that is fragile as a ceramic teapot, porcelain teapot, the fact that it still exists is a credit.
Actually, I found the
luck,
teapot.
I suppose.
Found the teapot in Yale and found this in the Wild Horse. And it's exactly the same maker.
Lucky.
Very lucky. Oh, yeah.
And the handle, obviously,
well,
something happened. So this is, what is that, a barley special?
Yeah, well, that was the way I got it. I guess the Chinese used it.
Okay.
So I just left it on there.
Very neat. Okay. And one other item that we'll take a look at right here. Now, this, I didn't know what this was. I thought it might have been a top for, to send the ashes of a relative back to China. This is a gong or a drum?
It is a gong or a drum, yeah.
And let me see if I can. They would hold it like this, and then what? Strike it with something
wood here?
No,
they'd probably put it right down, and they would strike it on this part of it, which would resonate through it. You see, that has quite a resonance.
The thing that's neat about this, and you had to point it out to me, was that it had been broken.
Yeah.
And there was a hole punched in it here.
That's right.
But some very talented coppersmith, or whatever this is made out of, has fixed it. And
the metalsmith did a superb job. They didn't want to send back to China for another one. They probably needed it in the Joss house, so they said, okay, we'll repair this. And he did repair it, and it's beautifully done.
It is, in fact. And
yeah.
Let me see if I can get a tone out of it. Can't get a tone out of it.
No, you need
to do that some other time. But the Chinese artifacts, how many Chinese were in British Columbia? What was the population of Chinese prospectors about that time?
Actually, the figures vary. It was called Gunshan, and there were probably at its height very close to 10,000 Chinese prospectors in the province. Now, that people will think that's an exaggeration. I don't think it is. Some people have used that figure. I think around 8,000 probably.
And they, of course, followed the Fraser. Sure. They were in the Similkameen. Wherever there was gold, the Chinese were there and did a great job of finding whatever was available.
Yeah, some of the best placermen in the business.
Okay. The other people obviously gravitated to this area too. This is a shot of a dredge.
Yeah.
Now, when did dredging begin in the Fraser?
Well, dredging actually began quite early, and most of the dredges came out in about the 1890s, Mike. And the dredges did fairly well as long as they watched the crew. And unfortunately, half the crews, the old maxim in the mining fields is you got about half the guys are high graders and half are dead straight. So they didn't do that well. It's really hard to know how well they did. Yeah. I know what their records say. The records say a few thousand ounces. That's possible, but if somebody was not watching the cleanup men, they might have been...
Could you double that? I mean, if half of the people were high graders, could you pretty much double how much gold?
Sometimes the high graders took much more than their share, though.
More than half.
Yeah.
Well, when I take a look at that vehicle, that vessel, that piece of machinery, I mean, it had to do everything. It had to take gravels from the bottom.
Sure.
It had to wash them. It had to dump the bad stuff out.
Yeah.
How many would be on the river? Do you know how many operated on the Fraser?
Not that many. The Fraser wasn't as good as some of the other rivers. I mean, the Yukon, the dredgers did very, very well there, but the Fraser's a very fast river, and it makes dredging more difficult than on a smaller creek, which really doesn't carry the gold that far.
In this day and age where we're concerned about salmon stocks and things like this, this photograph is a telling one. It kind of sends a shiver up my spine because the Fraser actually was blocked by a landslide.
And it broke through there, and that's only a 70-foot channel for the Fraser. That is incredible, Mike. Just unbelievable. And they could hear the noise when the landslide came down for miles around. And so it's still a dangerous canyon. You know.
I think Jackass Mountain is unstable, and it's hovering right there.
Yeah,
you could have a pretty good-sized lake where the canyon used to be.
Jackass Mountain moves a little bit every year.
So in this environment, the Fraser River, this environment moved the Chinese, moved the Boston men, and that's why it's called Boston Bar.
Sure, Boston Bar. Now, the interesting thing about Boston Bar is this, Mike. The original Boston Bar was not on the east side of the Fraser, it was on the west side. So if you look at the old maps, the 1860 maps and 1862 maps, Boston Bar is on the west side, where North Bend is now. And then when the Caribou Road came through, it came on the east side, so they shifted Boston Bar, but not where it is today. The second Boston Bar was actually south of the Boston Bar that exists there today.
And this
we've had 3 Boston Bars.
This photograph here, this is one of the ones I alluded to at the beginning of the program, an 1860s photograph.
Yeah, definitely.
This is phenomenal, the quality. I mean, it's a little on the gray side, but when you get right to the faces, the detail, the graininess is not there.
That's right.
These are folks that are in Boston Bar in the Fraser Canyon in 1860, and it looks like it could have come out of today.
Yeah, it's well, they were superb. Some of the professional cameramen who went up through that area in the gold fields took superb pictures.
Well, look at that, and look at that old hammerhead horse, and everybody holding still for that shot.
The other interesting thing, there aren't a lot of early photographs of Boston Bar. Practically every other town in the province there is, but there isn't a Boston Bar. It's very tough to get hold of.
Why would that be?
I don't know,
just
Mike.
Too transitory?
Maybe they haven't turned up.
I remember Boston Bar, of course, because as a kid, again, in the 50s, going on car holidays with my parents, you'd go through the Fraser Canyon and the cantilevered roads out over the abyss, and Boston Bar was finally a place you could stop and look at this great shot. This is out of the 40s, this shot of a hotel, a licensed premises.
Yeah, that's the Boston Bar of probably around 1940.
I think it's interesting because many a fortifying drink must have been taken there,
of course.
either before or after the trip through the canyon.
I kind of like the feel of the town still.
Yeah. You already mentioned the town that is survived, I guess, across the river from Boston Bar. But look at this is the Chinese working that area.
And they called it North Bend in this, so that photograph was undoubtedly taken around 1890s after the railroad came across, then it was named North Bend, essentially. And the CPR came across there. These Chinese miners, you can tell by the round rocks, that's all river run. And if you go across there today, Mike, you will see all the Chinese workings, acre after acre, and everything is done just with precision. They were superb miners.
This obviously, they've cut this area back into the bush. They've felled the trees. They're in the
They're quite a ways
forest,
from the river, actually.
And they are excavating with great detail the rocks that are from the river, an ancient river channel.
That's right.
And then they would bring down a little, the flume would bring down the water they needed to do the washing.
Yeah, they'd tap it from some creek up above.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a nice
when you
picture.
take a look at that bank, it's taken out with a little small shovels.
And all handwork very carefully, washed every rock.
Of course, if you want to go to North Bend today, and the way they first...
not today, but this is
the aerial tram doesn't go there anymore? Like that's another spot?
Yeah.
Look at that. That would, I don't know. I don't know if I've got the...
There's 2 ways to go. East,
eyes
west,
open or closed?
Straight down. Okay.
Because
3 ways, actually.
This shows just a couple of pedestrians out over the abyss, and this one shows a couple of fellas in their car.
Yeah, and you had to trust the cable.
Well, I guess you had to trust the cable. Did you ever take that trip?
No.
Would you ever take that
sure.
trip? You have no trouble with vertigo?
I've been across on similar vehicles.
Well, I'll just have to steel myself to the task, I guess, one of these days. Across at North Bend, of course, it was not inaccessible because the railway went down there. And this is a great photograph
Yeah, it is.
of one of the old locomotives on the CPR.
Yeah, that's CPR. I don't know what number it is, but it's there.
And look at a couple of guys out there. They've got the sidings. Look at the picket fence. They were
Oh, yeah.
proud of everything they did.
Yeah.
And the building in the background is what?
Well, that's an old hotel, but
Yep.
we have a better picture on it later on.
We'll get to
actually.
that.
Yeah.
This is a neat shot too. This is the Indian band at North
Band, yeah.
put together a brass band of their
Yep.
own.
Yeah.
And look at that. They got tubas. They got bugles. They got cornets.
They were quite
drums.
well known in the area too.
Right on.
Yeah.
What a neat shot.
Yeah, it is a nice shot, isn't it?
Okay, this is the one that you didn't want to allude to, but there is the CPR hotel.
Yeah, and they were ahead of their time. They thought people would flock into the Fraser Canyon to stay at that hotel. Well, essentially, North Bend really never got off the ground. I think the big excitement of the year, and in some cases, when they brought the circuses through and the elephants had to water at North Bend, so they let them out, and everyone came out to see the elephants. You know,
That would be something
That was
to
just
see.
the locals, though. It didn't bring a lot of money.
What
to the
did the
CPR.
CPR think was so good? Just because they were in the canyon and it was
Yeah.
so dramatic compared to what people knew?
Yeah, there was some visionary in the CPR in the 1890s, late 1880s and 1890s, who felt that they could attract people from all over North America. He was ahead of his time, that's all.
Was he the same guy who thought Banff would have been a good idea?
Yeah, I think probably the same.
Yeah. Excellent. Look at that. That's
Yeah.
gorgeous. Going to take a break here, but when we come back, a couple of more places to look at, and one of the ever-popular lost mine stories. We'll do that right after these words. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley. And contrary to popular opinion, Barley was not alive when all of the things we talked about happened. But some of the people you met were. So that's
And some still are.
yes. So this is the how do the stories get to you?
Well, you know, I was lucky. When I traveled around the province, I met a lot of fascinating people. And you have to gauge each individual. Dr. John Gibson in Penticton, who came out of the Similkameen, has been all over the province. He's a marvelous raconteur. He has a great memory, and he fed me a lot of stuff. George Coletti in Nelson is very good. Certainly, August Sinclair Milliken was one of a kind as well. And August Sinclair Milliken lived in Yale. I mentioned him in one other program. And we used to sit down and talk about history of the Fraser Canyon and elsewhere in British Columbia. He was a student of Gold Rush history as well.
When you say you used to sit down, what did you do? Did you go to his house? Did
I'd
you
go to his
the
house,
bar?
yeah.
Do you go to where'd you go?
Yeah,
So-
I went to his house, and it was full of artifacts. I eventually bought his whole collection when he was an older man. And he told me a number of stories that kind of stay in your memory. And one of them was the Lost Gordon Mine. And the Gordon Mine story is interesting, Mike, in that it's not exactly precise. Gus
None of
did
these
find,
are, it strikes me.
Well, actually, no. Actually, we're pretty careful on the program. We say there should be some sort of possibility, at least. I think there is a possibility, because this area, for instance, has a number of famous mines. One was the Eureka, that was just out of Hope.
And this is a silver mine.
Yeah.
And I notice in here there's about 11 people around. That seems to me a lot of people around a mine that's really only at this stage.
Yeah, but they put some of the packers in there and everything else. And this was a very controversial mine. It was supposed to be very rich in silver. It really wasn't as rich as they thought. There was a court case over it. There was a murder. It was a very involved case. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a mine that August Sinclair Milliken told me about in one of my many trips to see him in the 1950s, the 1960s, and 1970s. He's now passed on. Has been passed on about 4 or 5 years ago. And he said, Bill, I think that the lost Gordon mine does exist. I think it's close. He said he showed me a couple of mortars and pestles he had found in the general area, which means that somebody was up there and crushing down the quartz. He said it was a free milling quartz in the area, and it was very, very rich. And he tried to trace it down, but he was not really that well. And but he insisted that it was somewhere up Gordon Creek, beyond in the upper reaches of Gordon Creek. A number of locals knew about it, but nobody found it to this day. But Gus was very, very selective, so I'm inclined to think there may be something to it. I think there is.
So this is a quartz vein that's running above, that would be on the west side of
On
the
the west
Fraser
side,
River,
definitely.
and up Gordon Creek.
Up somewhere beyond Gordon Creek or close to Gordon Creek.
And it would be gold. You
Definitely.
figured it was pretty good showings. There.
Yes, he did. From what his information, he'd been there since the 1930s, so he'd have pretty good information.
All right. Let's take a look at a couple more artifacts here. And again, the fragility of some of this stuff just amazes me. What would be this little black stick?
Well, that's an ink stick, actually, and the Chinese were so meticulous that they named that it was an ink stick, and probably for a special type of calligraphy.
Now, I've seen some calligraphy being done, and this stick, you'd put some water into a stone, some kind of a stone receptacle, and then rub this, and this would, the material in this would mix with the water, and then you'd be able to take one of these, and I just am amazed that this is available. Bamboo, and it's got the brush at the front.
Some of the original ink is still in it from 100 years ago.
And that's what they would do, the Chinese calligraphy.
And there'd be finer points for that too. This would be for fairly crude writing, whereas the very fine ones are quite a bit smaller.
This is you know, you think to yourself about the general education of people, and the Chinese had to be amongst the most highly educated people in that area.
Placed great value on it, right from the, although many of the Chinese who came in originally were illiterate, and but they made sure that their children were not. Very interesting.
And that is a fascinating piece of cultural artifact there. This is a pewter bowl, and it happens to have some gold in it, just to attract your attention. This is Oriental as well?
Yeah, that's Oriental. That's Chinese for sure.
And the pewter, this would be very heavy in the lead category.
Yes, it is. It's an unusual pewter. It's a very soft pewter. Pewter, ordinarily, it ranges in hardness to a degree. This is an extremely soft pewter.
And stones that are polished. And those would be hand-polished stones too, wouldn't they? And set into that particular area. And one other thing that you brought on the show before, it's going to be kind of a difficult thing to get to, but this is as you say, a Keno game?
Yeah, it's a Keno game. It's the original. It's the forerunner to Keno. It's the Chinese call it the white dove game or the white pigeon game.
Each one of these pieces of wood is a very hard wood.
Yeah, it's rosewood.
Has a character carved in reverse.
In reverse, right.
On it. And this is, how many years would it have taken to do? This is a work of immense dedication.
It would take possibly 1,000 hours. You guess a little bit. There are 160 pieces, I think, or 140 pieces in the whole set.
And when you take a close look at it, you can see each chisel mark, each gouge, and the way it was laid down, and then the immense detail of the face of it.
Fine artisan, Mike.
And when we've talked about the bar, Boston Bar on the Fraser River, there were how many other bars? There was
on the
Hills
Fraser
Bar,
major bars. There was Murderer's Bar. There was Strawberry Bar. There's Fort Yale Bar. There was Seabird Bar. Oh gosh, it goes on and on and on. There was Boston Bar. There was Sailor's Bar. I think there were probably 50 major bars, if you look at the old maps, on the Fraser River between Lytton and way down to Seabird Bar, which is near Fort Langley.
Each one of them occupying the time of endless miners, Chinese and European. Thank you very much for the return visit to the Fraser River. See you next time on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns.